You're tuned in to RX Radio.
Shit. It is aggressive how much or how long commercials are. You know what's one thing we don't do that I think we should start doing is the podcast. I guess it would be the intra podcast ad. Because like we come on here off the jump and we're like, yo, this is what we do. For those of you, first off, welcome to the show. This is Dr. Jordan Jiunta. I am Dr. Jordan Shallow. Crazy to say. I don't think I've ever introduced myself in my life until just this very moment as Dr. Jordan Shallow. I think that was the first time in like a decade.
Yeah.
Actually, I may have done it before, like in high school or something, but like never actually
like when you had
by
a
the
doctorate
government
degree.
Yeah.
That's
Didn't
wild.
feel right.
Yeah, I just put an email signature in and I put Dr. Jordan Jiunta DC and I'm like, this feels weird.
Yeah. You know what's worse or what's bad is so I'm flying to Singapore this or next week, and Pure Gym Singapore, if you guys are in Singapore, come roll out, tickets still available. They book my flights. And like I find it's like I think they think it's a sign of respect. So I get my ticket and I'm like, oh, for fuck's sakes. Because it'll say like, prefix or whatever, Sir or Mr. Jordan, whatever. And they put doctor. And I'm like, what are you signing me up for? Like, what? I got to do a tracheotomy? Like, what if someone has a DVT? Like, there's not a doctor on board.
No.
I'm going back to sleep. I'm watching Harry Potter. Leave me alone. Always no. So yeah, welcome to the podcast. All to say, especially because now that the podcast is on YouTube, I notice a lot of YouTube podcasts just do like the hard cut. It's not even a YouTube ad, right? Like it used to be that YouTube ads, and then they got wise. They're like, well, we're just going to do an advertisement halfway. Warning, I might just randomly throughout the episode today just cut to like an impromptu commercial for something to do with Prescript.
Yeah, I'm going to try and sell you Zyn at some point.
Dude, I still.
Yeah.
Is this a lifelong thing? You take this one to the grave?
I think addiction is a lifelong thing. Yeah. It's like a recovering addict is someone that's just not using at the time.
Right.
It's not like a disease you cure.
Yeah. So Jiunta, little known fact, he's actually a motivational speaker on the side. Look, you fucking junkies.
Are you a quitter?
Yeah. Oh man. Do you think it'll ever just progress to cigarettes? Like you ever think you get to that point? We're like, hey, this death thing isn't happening quick enough. Like I'm gonna go. Yeah. Okay.
It inevitably progresses to cigarettes. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can take the kid out of Pennsylvania, as the saying goes. You can't take Pennsylvania out. I would be interested of the per capita smoking statistics in America. I would have to imagine Pennsylvania is up there.
Yeah, it's got to be up there, man.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be. I'm sure tobacco companies have those analytics, right? Like you probably have like kindergarten teachers who are getting paid on the side by like Marlboro or something like that. Seems like that part of the world. Anyways, welcome back to RX Radio. We've been slowly trying to formalize this podcast over time, and we're not doing a great job, as some of you watching on YouTube would now realize that this is we're on episode 500 and something.
Yeah, we're like 560, 570s, I think.
Which means we've had about 570 different configurations of the audio visual of this fucking podcast. Coming to me live from my kitchen. And look, I'm going to be straight with everyone here. Before I set up this camera configuration, I had to make sure that there weren't illicit drugs on the counter behind me. I made like, there's still some suspicious looking shit here, right? Like that's a bottle. That's a new Pept, actually. That's a peptide. That's how dumb I am. It's like I need brain juice. Like I got to go right to the source.
Yeah.
That's what that is. And I made sure, and I was like, all right, is there nothing else nefarious here in the frame? Yeah, it's bad. It's rough out here. But this is actually, believe it or not, for those of you potentially first joining us for the first and maybe last time, this is pretty formal, actually. We've done a pretty good job so far. We've got an intro. Both of our names, which I don't think we've been doing that ever at all. So yeah, we're off to a great start, and we'll maybe cut to an ad halfway through, impromptu. But I think cutting to the chase of the episode today, we wanted to talk about squatting. Now, look, content creation, I think, is very cyclical. I'm sure 550 episodes. I can't imagine there hasn't been a time that we haven't talked about squatting in the past. But I think it's, what, squatting has fallen out of vogue, I think, right? Like, I think in the
I hate that.
hypertrophy world, yeah, it's, what, it ebbs and flows, bro, right? Like, I was thinking of this the other day. The Smith machine, if
That's
you
a
had to
big
talk,
one I see.
man,
Oh,
like when you were a kid, and I mean this with no malice in my heart, but like my biggest, you could understood the appeal of a Smith machine, but you also didn't want to be called gay in high school. So like you just didn't, but like, like, oh, look, right.
yeah.
Sure, it sounds bad, but like everyone knows that. Like when I was before the internet, before cell phone cameras, before whatever's going on in the world, like that was the worst thing you could be called. And I don't agree with the negative connotation of it, whatever, but it was enough to keep the Smith machine at bay. And it was.
Yeah, that was the most politically correct way to convey that message. I'm on board, man.
But I think anyone who was around fitness in North America as a kid, there was just a general like, whoa, bro, what are you doing over there? You know what I mean? Like, it was like a just the tip, like, no, dude, like you can't, like, it's just, but now and I think doing that with the Smith machine was kind of a gateway drug to kind of getting off the barbell squat. And, goal dependent, I think so much now with the propagation of social media, you can only show that you're strong when you're lifting weights. You can show that you're jacked with everything, right? So I do think that the reward system around squatting is the number one thing that has led to its demise. Is that it for most people does not have the same feedback loop like doing things that are more targeted specifically to hypertrophy outcomes. And also, let's not mention that it's fucking hard and people don't like hard stuff.
Right. Yeah.
But
I can avoid that.
like I know bodybuilders that, you walk in the grocery store and someone goes, oh my God, you must bench like 600 pounds. And they're like, no, they actually look nothing like 600-pound benchers. But they enjoy that reward system, right? Because if you're big and muscular, there's not a straight line between big and muscular and strong. There's like a Venn diagram where those two things overlap, but it's not the straight line that most general population people think it is. They think, oh, that person's big, he must be strong, and that's true to a certain degree. So when we think about, squatting, especially now that, call it the Huberman effect, Peter Attia, Gabrielle Lyons, friend of the show. When we think of the effect of the general population now getting into fitness more and more, there's not the same amount of attention to detail, deference around the movement, how to know when it's the right exercise for a particular client, given their particular skill level, given their particular goals. And really fundamentally, like there's a lack of applied knowledge when it comes to doing the movement well. So I thought we would take some time today and dive into somewhat of like an applied checklist of sorts when it comes to squatting, or like a heuristic around squatting, more so for the general population. Because with one of the problems I find is that as people become more proficient in their own careers as trainers and coaches, they lose touch with what it's like to not be good at lifting. And it's really hard to see these exercises through the physical lens of someone who's so drastically relatively incapable to them, right? A term that I sort of like coined is physical empathy. People have a hard time embodying the body and mind strength and coordination of someone who's just not been lifting that long. So I wanted to start off at the beginning and be like, okay, where would you start? Like, I think this is knowing our audience, this is kind of a PSA to trainers when it comes to implementing the squat from, inception in a program, assessment, exclusion criteria, all the way through to, execution, technique, variations, progressions, etc. Where would you start in like coaching coaches around the squat? Because it does seem to be a bit of a lost art.
Right. I think the number one thing that you need to understand, because I get questions a lot about this, like put up a Q&A on Instagram, like people, there's always squat technique or squat or like body proportions versus squat. There's a lot of things that people ask around this that there's not much clarity on. And I think a lot of it has to be very specific to each person. And the first thing is like, why are you squatting? Why are you going to put the squat in the program? And that could be for strength goals, which is my preference because that's the coolest. It could be for hypertrophy. It could be for personal goals or just skill learning. It could be for athletic performance, depending on the athlete and what they have to perform at. It could be for sport, whether we're talking powerlifting, whether we're talking weightlifting. So there's a lot of different ways that you can think about implementing the squat and a lot of different end goals. Like, is the goal to squat as much weight as you can? Is the goal to grow someone's quads and glutes? Like, is the goal just to move better and to accomplish this new task? So I think the number one thing is you need to understand why someone is squatting, and then that's going to influence the way that you approach implementing the squat in their program. Like, for me, I think the essence of a squat is strength, right? So that's the approach that I'm going to take in this answer, because it would take forever if we answered it through all of those. We can kind of touch on all of those, but something you said earlier is there's this Venn diagram of people that are big being strong and people that are strong being big. And I think of it in the way that if you train hypertrophy, a side effect of growing your muscles is getting stronger. If you train strength, a side effect of getting stronger is growing your muscles. So it's kind of this positive reinforcement from one to the other. So they don't necessarily, they don't operate independent of each other. There is a connection between these two. And I think if you want to get better at either of these, like if you want to get better at being big, you need to get stronger or have some sort of focus on getting stronger. And if you want to get strong, you have to have some sort of emphasis on getting bigger as well. So that's kind of the vein in which I approach this for strength training or for hypertrophy as well. It's just the phase is just going to be a little bit different depending on who's putting it in, why they're putting it in, and when they're putting it in. But I think in terms of building a good squat, there's two sides to this. You need the physical capability in terms of range of motion, in terms of midline stability, hip stability, lower body stability. And then aside from that, you need to understand the skill of the squat. You need to know what you're trying to accomplish and build the coordination of the movement. So those two things can happen independently. And both of them are going to have a different implication on performance depending on the skill of that lifter. So for most people, someone that, maybe they've never squatted before or the squat is a new movement, I'm going to start very much in building the qualities that make up a good squat, independent of squatting on a barbell. So what that's going to look like to me is number one all the fucking time is core stability. Right? That's always going to be where the squat breaks down, is understanding how to stabilize your rib cage and pelvis, how to maintain that orientation that you need throughout the squat, because you're going to be axial loading. The bar is going to be on your shoulders and you're pushing your feet into the ground to move it. So if you don't understand how to stabilize your core, then that's where you're going to fall short every single time. You're just going to be less effective in the movement in general. You're not going to be loading the appropriate muscle groups, and it's really going to stifle your progress out of the gate. So number one is always understanding how to use your core as it pertains to the squat. Outside of that, and that's something you could train every movement that you do. You could train that in your pull days. You could train that in your push days. Like it's really just a general understanding of how to create and maintain a neutral ribcage to pelvis orientation and what that looks like for you. Aside from that, it's going to be building the capacity to hold the positions that you need to maintain to be effective in the squat. And I think that is done much more effectively unilaterally than bilaterally. So when people are learning this, you're going to be able to challenge yourself to a greater range of motion. You're going to be able to be more specific in terms of tissue loading unilaterally versus bilaterally. And this is where it kind of feeds into, is your intention to get stronger or is it to get bigger? And it doesn't fucking matter, because either way, this is going to help you, right? It's going to help you perform on the barbell if you're trying to get stronger. And if you're going to get bigger, like I said, you can be more specific in the tissue that you're loading, and you can always load through a greater range of motion unilaterally versus bilaterally. So like understanding what that looks like, and kind of taking it back to I guess arthrokinematics, or like the definition of function at the hip, is that there's going to be kind of coupled movement patterns, or specific movement patterns that are going to allow us to move in the way that the hip is meant to move, right? So as our hip flexes, that's going to be synonymous with some degree of abduction and external rotation. A lot of times, as the hip extends, it's going to be there's going to be some sort of consistency through internal rotation and adduction. Like if we just talk like walking lunge, like that's kind of the pattern that we want to be able to execute on, with the leg inflection versus the leg in extension. So understanding the way that we need to be moving, I think, is part of this, and then moving in a way that's consistent with that, and then having loading parameters that allow you to stay in those positions and challenge you to increase your capacity to hold those positions, either for more time, if we're talking about building endurance to hold these positions, or against greater loads, if we're talking about actual strength to execute on these positions. So that's going to be a core component of actually being able to execute later on down the line, is understanding the mechanics at the hip, understanding how pelvic stability and core stability is going to allow for that to happen, and then starting to be able to progress the stimulus there, whether that is volume, whether that is loading, whether that's someone's ability to accommodate center of mass over base of support. Those are all kind of key components that are going to allow them to have that proprioception, or kind of that subconscious understanding of, okay, I'm in good position versus I'm not in good position later on when you put a bar on their back. That exists. And then there's also the skill component of this, right? And that could be something that progresses over time, and exactly what that looks like. And I think loading parameter is the best way to progress that over time. But we're talking about understanding how to maintain a static rib cage to pelvis orientation, get the appropriate amount of flexion, rotation at the hip, flexion, rotation at the lower leg, so the knee and kind of through the tibia, while maintaining a non-displaced center of mass, right? Getting through basically lowering in the squat and then standing up in the squat in the proportions of hips to knees that we need to, without deviating center of mass, while keeping a very precise alignment in where we're pushing into the ground. That's going to be the skill component boiled down into like some big dumb words. So that can be done in different ways. And like I said, loading parameters, like, this is stuff that we talk about a lot in the level 1. We talk about a lot in like a lot of the in-person stuff that we do. And it's kind of a key component of what we teach at Prescript is understanding basic support and center of mass, and how we're deviating those things in a meaningful way, or how we're accommodating for those things in a meaningful way. And that's going to allow us to progress whatever stimulus that we're trying to dial up or dial back. So that could be something like a counterbalance squat. It could be like a counterbalance squat where you're holding on to a squat rack, where you're literally just learning how to get into the squat position, and then using that external support as a way, or as a means of deviation of center mass forward or back. So you're really just learning how to stay balanced as you go through that descent and then ascending back up in the squat. And I can progress to things like anterior load, posterior load, dumbbell, kettlebell, barbell, safety bar. Like there's a ton of different ways that we can dial in that variable to be the learning piece that someone needs in terms of understanding how to maintain a proper center of mass to allow them to express that force through their legs. I think that's kind of a high level explanation, but yeah, I'll pass it off to you.
Yeah, I'm going to build around that, because there's a handful of ways we can go. One of the things I really liked was how you superimpose the strength and hypertrophy as the same thing. And for most people, for a really long time, that road does not split, right? Like you do not approach a fork in the road in your training. Like the methods by which you achieve both of those goals do not start to diverge for a really long time. Yeah. Right. And I think that's something where out of the gate, and we lose this a lot. Like we lose because there's two things. One, and the first one I wanted to talk about as far as zooming out and applying some of these principles to squatting, and first exclusion criteria of like, is the squat the right move, or where to start with squatting regressions, or where to start with even some of the underlying movement skills that you talked about of like, hey, can we get the spine to be rigid? Can we get the hips to be mobile through a full range? Can we go get these base level ingredients so we can cook up a good squat and do so in a way that's non-compensatory? And I think that's something where there's a real push, and I challenge trainers who want to give a shit about their job. Like, there's the definition of fitness is from a biological perspective. And I was having a conversation with Broderick Chavez the other day, friend of the show. Maybe he's not, actually. I don't know. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but someone I have a huge amount of respect for. And he's like, the word fitness means, and he's a biologist, and he's like, the word fitness means the ability of an organism to perform a particular task. And that, I think, in the grander sense of evolution and taxonomy and survival and all that, is like obviously 100% true. When we get into the nuances of lifting, and I think the nuances matter, because I think a lot gets lost in the overgeneralization, and there is an overgeneralized approach to introducing what are more complex movements to people who don't have a vast physical capacity. So I see these like, what I'm going to use what generation are we on? Z? Is it Z?
Yeah.
Or is that okay?
I think they're back to alpha, but Z is like, or Z for my American friends.
Thank you.
Is like the one that's like the teenagers right now.
So wait, the next generation is generation alpha?
Yeah, like
these better be the Kid Fight Club. I called it years ago. I talked about Kid Fight Clubs. That would be sick, man. Generation Alpha.
That's how I grew up. That's why I am the way I am, because of the brain damage.
Generation Alpha, smoking cigarettes in Pennsylvania, getting in fights with cops.
Let's overcorrect.
Your girlfriends.
Bunch of pussies out there.
God damn it. Anyway, so there is this. So the term I'm going to use is mid. There's this very like mid. You can't say it without doing like a weird thing with your body just to be condescending.
Yeah,
like,
it's weird to hear you say it too.
Ah, God, bunch of losers. I'm glad that we're at a point in the podcast and maybe our lives where we just made an open reference to using the word gay as derogatory, and we didn't stop the podcast.
Yeah, I think gay and retarded are coming back. Like, I think they're gonna have a resurrection.
I think so. And because I think we're getting to a point where, if you've gotten to know us over 500 and X number of episodes, and you've gotten to maybe interact with us in person, like, I feel like we have enough, and maybe we don't, maybe we're not that I think we're going to get worried about being canceled. We're probably not that important, but like, there's no malice there. There's never was, never will be. No. Trust me, if there was malice, you'd know about it. We'd tell you. But it has nothing to do with either of those. Anyways, back on track. Right. Very mid. Actually, if there's anything derogatory I've said to this podcast, and I want it to be derogatory, it's to Generation Z people and the word mid. Yeah. So I hope to offend everyone in that generation that uses that word. So yes, you should be offended, and I don't care. But there's this very mid approach to lifting by coaches who aren't good at lifting, right? And it's like, you can't extrapolate out the complexities of something that you haven't done to its fullest extent, right? Like, you can't extrapolate out and say that, like, oh, look, like, just put a bar on your back, it's not that complicated, you don't have to do any of this hip stuff, you don't have to do any of this core stuff, you just like sit down and stand back up. It's like, okay, you haven't coached anyone that's ever gotten strong. Started off weak and actually gotten really strong. You yourself have not gotten really strong, and like, don't at me with like a 365 back squat as like a full grown man. Like, sorry, like, it's just, there's levels to this shit, man, and you're just not there. And I think it does the coach a disservice, but more frustrating as someone who's been on the other side of this approach so many times and trying to unpack these chronic, easy to identify compensatory issues or things that lead to compensations in a squat, is like, you don't take the time to look at the base level ingredients. Like, if you can't, in a very remedial setting, control your spine, then in a loaded setting, you're definitely not going to figure it out. It may look to an objective outsider that you have figured it out, but we can, as we peel the layers back, as we often have to do in those cases where these people are thrust into something that they may not have the skills for, skills being plural, that we then quickly see as we regress to some of these base elements that they do not possess. It's like, well, I can draw a pretty straight line between the dysfunction or discomfort that you're having, or sometimes even pain or injuries, from these more isolated layers of compensation, because you're missing these base level skills. So I think that's something that I want to point out at a high level. And look, if you're a coach and you care, join Prescript Level 1. Sign up now, www.pre-script.com. The opt-in list is live. It's the only discount we offer for the Prescript Level 1 course. Registration goes live December 2nd. The next semester starts January 27th. Look forward to seeing you in class. Boom!
That was
Nailed
good.
it. Not bad, eh? Right.
I'll peer pressure you into using nicotine pouches along the way.
There you go. Hashtags in at checkout. Actually, that's not true. But I really challenge people to, if you care about your job and you care about the people you train, to like put an ounce of your own thought and have a bit of pushback towards this movement. And so, like, it's not necessarily a conversation about squatting, but it's kind of like a meta conversation about squatting, because trust me, there's people who have done this themselves to the highest level with other people at the highest level. Like, I've been in the room at the meets where people who've squatted more than anyone who's ever walked the face of the earth. Like, I know what it takes. I've seen it, and I've seen it go all the way wrong on the other side. Like, I've seen the entire spectrum of the human interaction with squatting, right? I've been to the third world countries where I was just in Dubai the other day, and some dude was sitting on the corner, hacking a dart, full squat, right? Some Filipino cat. And
Legend.
then I've seen Vlad Alzahov take 11-17 to the house, right? Like, I've seen like everything in between those two experiences I've seen, right? So it's like, but there's an edgy siren song that mid coaches are flocking to, that it's like, yeah, like, we don't got to do all of this, like, warm, like, okay, all right, man, like, sure, whatever. You probably, because you have a retention rate of 4 months with your clients, and because they don't get any progress and they start to get hip pain, and you just tell them that there's a difference between soreness and pain, and they're like, you're not listening to me, and then they fuck you off. So you just haven't had the data points to collect to actually make a right decision. So that's like thing number one. Thing number two, you're kind of building out this heuristic of squatting. I think, and not always the case, but I think starting with chronological age and lifting age, and coming up with some sort of working coefficient that runs adjacent to your ability as a coach to start to recognize patterns. I think those three things are really important in starting off with the right foot, as far as, what type of core stuff, what type of unilateral stuff, or can we jump right into squatting based off of those three things, right? Like, so the three variables at play that I'd want people to kind of pay attention to if choosing whether or not someone is a good candidate for a squat, or a candidate for, or for which squat they are a candidate for, is going, okay, what is their biological age, right? That's a big one. What is their lifting age? And then what is my ability as a coach to recognize the patterns of these two things as they superimpose, right? So there's a lot of variability in lifting age, right? But there's obviously not a ton of variability in chronological age. You are as old as you are. Now, the lifting age will pull you a certain direction within reason, right? So, if you're a kid, let's say, I would say in this context, it's useful to identify someone as a youth under the age of 25, per the criteria that if we're identifying that the squat is a skill that we learn, you have a lot of malleability in your frontal cortex up until 25, right? So you still are fairly plastic, fairly malleable in the way, like, whether it's learning a language, whether it's learning a physical skill. That's why I would choose 25 as like a cutoff, more or less. And these aren't binary ones and zeros. There's a gradation. It's not like once you turn 26, your brain just turns into a gargoyle or something. It's going to start to solidify in what we'll see it as its final form, if you will. But I think that's a good mile marker to be like, all right, if I got someone under the age of 25, we have a very workable biological age to teach them things, right? And there's going to be a cutoff on the other end, right? Like it's all on bell curves, where if I have someone who's 11 or 12, it's like, okay, we probably haven't eclipsed some physical environment, some physical and mental developmental milestones where squatting may be useful in any capacity, right? So then we need to enter in like, all right, well, what is our window of biological age that's like kind of quote unquote optimal to learn? I would say 15 to 25. It's like once God puts you on the greatest cycle of all time, like that between 15 and 25, that I feel like that range is going like, okay, this is the time. And let me tell you something about this time. If you're in this age range right now, send it. Send it. Send it. No. Like, and dude, I'm not, get off Instagram, unfollow everyone that's not like, just follow Westside Barbell accounts. If you are between the ages of 15 and 25 and you want to set a trajectory for the rest of your life to be big and strong. I had a gym teacher named Mr. Kavanaugh, and he was a proponent of this idea. And I remember like I would, and you the same, and you still, like I would try and fucking murder myself in the gym. And he like walked in the gym with us. He's like, look, man, like I was say 17, maybe 16. And he kind of like pointed me out and was like, there was no matter what happens to Shallow, there's not going to be a point in his life where he can't bench 225. And he's like, and that, in 225 and you're in the 10th grade is like kind of a big deal. And because it's just like, I see guys getting into working out in their 30s, and it's, you can make great progress, but like that window between 15 and 25 where you have the malleability neurologically and you have the recoverability hormonally, let's just say, when you have those two things together, you will make progress that will last with you for the rest of your life. You will learn things. Like I was just in Dubai with friend of mine, Jordan Boxer. He lived in Panama, and he speaks pretty good Spanish. And one of our waiters was Spanish, and he went when he was younger. He lived there when he was younger. Now he hadn't spoken it in a while, but in interacting just a little bit with this person, he was able to be like kind of fluid again. He could pick it up, right? Like the muscle memory part of it, it's like, well, you need to have there's a coalescence of factors that makes that memory potent and makes it something that you can adhere. And I think that window between 15 and 25 is such a massive opportunity for people to learn and remember how to be strong. And, strength is a few things. It's obviously an adaptation, but first and foremost, that adaptation is an efficiency, right? It's a neuromuscular efficiency. That's how it starts. So neuromuscular efficiency is like that's your first motor unit recruitment, your new gains or whatever you want to call it. So if you're dealing with someone, you're training someone, you're working with someone, you're advising someone, and they're between those ages, it's a really valuable piece of information to get. And then you need to build on that. You go, okay, I have an ace in the hole. I'm between 15 and 25. Next, what is their lifting age? Right. And now, obviously, at 15, you might not be dealing with someone with a tremendous amount of lifting age. And that's going to be like, all right, we're going to probably start in the more regressed part of the squatting model, right? With some of the core work, like teaching these basic skills. But you got to understand that, look, the plasticity of the brain at this age and the recoverability hormonally at this age, they're going to fucking rip through these progressions, right? Like you can spend a couple of weeks of being like, all right, we're going to get some midline coordination. You kind of look like a giraffe with hockey skates on, but you're going to be able to learn fast because your brain and recover fast because your hormones. And it's like, super. There go the balloons on Riverside. Absolutely insane. If you're watching this on YouTube, it's just wild out here. So that's going to be that's a very useful understanding of like, okay, we have chronological age and biological age, right? Now, if we're going into the later stages of that age range of like, okay, well, now we're dealing with like a 23-year-old who's been lifting for 3 or 4 years. You might take a look at some of these regressions, but what would be 2 to 3 weeks of doing some regress movement, some core awareness stuff could be 2 or 3 exercises, right? And this is going to then come into the final filter criteria of your ability to coach. Like, how much experience do you have? Because there are some kids that have worked at that are 15 years old that have the physical capacity of a 25-year-old man. And it's like, all right, we're going to skip this 2 to 3 week shit. Like, you came out of the box ready to go. Like, you're track ready at 15 years old. Like, we're going to drop the hammer. That takes a bit of time, but it's something that you need to be mindful of. And I think a lot of coaches get too formulaic and don't rely on that last piece, right? Like, every single person you work with is a data point in your algorithm of thinking, right? In your decision-making tree. So, I see a kid walk in the door and he's got ankles the size of bowling balls. And he's like, I'll tell you, classic example. Do you know Cecil and Prince Fielder?
No.
Gee, okay. All time, I think they're both Hall of Famers baseball. Prince Fielder and Cecil Fielder. They're just like, they're some of the best baseball players of all time. There was a kid in the gym one day, and I walked in. I was like, what college is this kid in? Like, in there by himself, one-on-one session. And I was like, okay, this kid can move, jack, neck, like wrists are thick. But so I'm thinking like 19, 20 years old, 14, friend of the show, Mike Hunter. His kid is 14 years old, and he's 6'4", 220. Right now, watching him move. Right? Like, okay, Mike's kid, 6'4", 220. Mike's big dude, played football. I walk in, I see this kid, and I go, what's the deal? And it's like, that's Cecil Fielder's. And I think it's Cecil's the older of the two. That's the grandfather. And Prince is the son, and he's the grandson. So it's like, I'm looking at a pedigree family. I'm looking at an absolute genetic freak of a person. And I'm looking at my chronological age and skill, and I'm going, and my coaching, and I go, okay, yeah, put a bar on his back. Right? Like, well, let's not stand on ceremony here and go through something. It's like, yeah, he's got it. Right? Maybe it's Maybelline. Maybe he's born with it. Like, homeboy's ready to fucking go. And like 365, 400 pounds, no problem, 14 years old. Right? But it's like, and again, you got to have these systems in place. Like, I'm literally thinking they're looking at this kid going, okay, give me a biological age, give me a lifting age, and then give me my coach's eye of these data points. And I'm going to come up with a decision really quickly of what we're going to do. And that was it in practice. Right. So that, I think, when we're looking at squatting from like a bird's eye view, or like a 10,000 foot view, and we just talked about, the youth version of that, because we could play that out on the other side of like, hey, what do we do with the 50 and over crowd? Right? Because it's a 50 and over crowd that the biological age, sure, it's going to set some people behind the 8 ball, hormonally, neurologically, environmentally, physically, mentally, psychologically. Like, there can be a lot there. However, you could also be dealing with people who have been building a tremendous base of lifting age, right? Mm-hmm. That gives them the opportunity. And then you need to come in with that tiebreaker of your coach's eye, your experience, and your ability to discern these patterns that you're recognizing. And then you need to make a decision. 1, squat. Yes, no. Okay. Yes. Okay. Which one? How often? How does it fit into their program? What's the volume? What's the intensity? What's the regressions? What are the bottlenecks potentially? How do we offset those? What are the movement limitations? What are the things they're good at? What are the things they're bad at? What previous injuries they have? And all of that happens like that. Right. So I think when you look at the squat, and we can dive into a little bit more of the mechanics and the variations, I think having those filtering criteria is going to be the thing that sets your decision on those criteria to the power of these broader conversations.
Right. And I think weighing in on that also, like determining biological age, yes, but also training age, something that you need to understand is that someone that's younger on either of those scales, we're looking to build good habits, right? That's what we're doing in the gym, is we're trying to build a solid foundation that they can continue to build higher and higher on top of, because eventually how we're going to build is going to be loading. But that's not how we're going to start this progression, right? We need to give them the qualities and the capabilities that now it's appropriate to progress loading, versus someone that does have an older biological age or a higher training age. A lot of times, if we're trying to introduce a squat and it's from a learning perspective, we're going to have to undo the damage that they've done over the course of their lifetime or their lifting career. So that's actually like breaking down bad habits and encouraging better habits. And the cool thing about that is it kind of looks the same, right? And the two things that I'll kind of double down on is that a lot of that is going to be done with unilateral work outside of the barbell in terms of the learning or the undoing of bad habits over time. Is that we want to put them in essentially positions that are going to humble the fuck out of them. A lot of people, when they get in the gym, especially if they're looking to squat and they're looking to squat to get stronger, they're going to think loading progression, right? That's their understanding of how to get stronger. Is I need to use more weight and I need to keep doing the movement repetitively against more and more weight. But yes, that makes sense if you are very technically proficient and you have all the qualities that will allow you to be successful at this. But a lot of times people don't. And a lot of times it's the people that don't that understand it to that in that like low definition picture of this is how I get stronger. So they're the people that you really need to throw constraints at. You need to put them in positions where they're going to be humbled by the variables that you're using, the loading constraints, the exercise selection. Those are things that you need to put them in a position to work really hard, but it's going to humble the fuck out of them because they have maybe a single 45-pound dumbbell in a contralaterally loaded Bulgarian split squat, and that's going to fuck them up for 3 days. Or it's going to be a squat variation that you want them to progress, and maybe they want to progress it for loading, but it's something that like a front squat or an anterior loaded squat, something that's going to put them in position to work really hard, and it's going to put them in position to delay technical breakdown, but they can still push really hard on that variation. So I think that's a consideration to make as well, is that understanding the training age of the person, and then that's going to dictate either building good habits or undoing of bad habits, and then constraining them in terms of how they're going to progress. Is that what's the goal? What's the carrot that we're dangling in front of them that they're going to be chasing after? And ultimately, in most cases, that will be loading for someone that has squat specific goals. But we need to slow that progression to make sure that we're building, we're encouraging good habits along the way. Because when we continue to increase loading, the thing that's going to drop off, they're going to fail technically eventually, right? That's anyone. It's the best squatters in the world. If you put too much weight on the bar, then something's going to break down technically. So that's a very short progression that we can run is a loading progression, whether that's linear, whether that's wave loading, whether that's undulating loading. It doesn't matter which one of those is. That's going to be the last thing that we want to progress towards is chasing loading, or like a squat progression. And I had this thought, I was squatting the other day, and I'm like, understanding like a lot of the squat programs or squat progressions out there, it's like they're very mathematically pleasing numbers, like a 5x5 at 70%, a 4x4 at 75. Like that's something that the stronger you get, the less that makes sense. Like that, yes, I understand what you're going for here. It's very mentally nice to do 4 sets of 4 reps at a certain percentage, but you have someone that's squatting any meaningful weight, like volume is not something that's going to make them squat better. It's precision that's going to make them squat better. So we don't want to use volume or loading to make them break down. We want to use exercise selection to bolster their ability to increase the intensity on the movement that they're actually going to be testing in terms of loading. So that's a kind of a later down the line discussion to have, but like when you actually get to squatting, how are you going to progress that? But even before we get into that, like it's, as we talk about actual like actionable things that we can do in the gym, there's going to be this kind of framework that I run people through in terms of, like you said, progression. And that might take people, it might take them 4 sessions. It might take them 4 months. It might take them 4 years to get through that position or that progression. But ultimately it's going to be, I need to see a proficiency that they can control their core against different loading parameters. I need to see that they have the understanding of how to not only control their core, but move in the requisite ways through the hip, through the knee, through the ankle. And that's going to happen to a greater degree, to a greater range of motion with unilateral work. So whether that's like lunges, split squats, front foot elevated, rear foot elevated, walking lunges, whether that's unilateral hinging like a B stance RDL, whether that's just hinging in general like a dumbbell RDL, that shows me that you have a really good understanding of how to control your core so that we can move at the hip and we can move at the knee. And there is a degree of precision that's going to be more hip biased, of course, but that's going to show me that you have a really good understanding of how to control your core and move at the hip, which is a prerequisite to being able to squat effectively. So there's going to be these kind of landmarks along the way that I want people to tick off before I'm going to put them on a barbell and progress them for loading. And something that can happen simultaneously is they can still learn that skill of the squat. That can be something that we have in the program, but it's not going to be the meat and potatoes of what they're trying to do. That's going to be kind of the dessert metaphorically here. That's going to be the thing that's going to allow them to feel like they're working towards a squat, and they are, but that's not going to be the thing that's going to drive progress. It's going to be everything else in the program that's really going to put them in position to succeed at that. But that's going to be some sort of consistent vein in the program that will look different in terms of loading parameters, in terms of the way that we're forcing them to deviate their center of mass, and in terms of like literal exercise selection, exercise order along the way. So it might look like early on, that session might be someone doing like bear crawls and anterior loaded carries, and then moving on towards some sort of unilateral work, like maybe an externally supported Bulgarian split squat, and maybe even some isolation work around like glutes, quads, hamstrings, adductors, and then having them at the end of the session do a heel elevated, goblet loaded squat, and just have them do that for some sort of like capacity building or kind of learning there, where they're sets of 15 or 20 reps where they're starting to understand the proportions in which they're using hips and knees, and kind of understand how they need to maintain tension to the core with a kind of more vertical translation of the pelvis before we start to deviate that into a little bit more of kind of an anterior torso lean. And there's going to be a bit more of a coordination aspect to that. So that could be very literally, that could be their first session in learning how to squat for someone that kind of checks the boxes and has the range of motion and the physical competencies that are going to allow them to jump right into a variation of squat right away.
Yeah, I think you can tell that hypertrophy has been in vogue, and strength has really lost its kind of cachet, because there's an underlying principle that you just described that is starting to become very evident in the hypertrophy world, which is like, we talked a long time, or people have talked for a long time about the best exercise for a particular muscle group. The hypertrophy world is slowly coming around to like, well, we don't just do one exercise per muscle group. So we're going to have to do other stuff. So we can sit here and argue about the semantics of, the best way to train your glutes or the best way to train that. But it's like, it's under too fine a microscope that these conversations are being had. Right. So the hypertrophy world being front and center of people having these conversations in public discourse has slowly started to painfully come around to the fact that like, well, there's no best exercise. There's, exercise order. They're probably better at certain things depending on limitations. But, the debates are slowly, not as fast as I would like, but they're slowly starting to wane about the best exercise per particular movement. And I hope to see a world where the squat centric approach to squatting starts to adopt a similar open aperture to exercise, in realizing that, look, just like the glute has, there's an upper and a lower, and one is an extender and one's a more of an abductor, and you need variation in the exposures to different ranges and length tension and resistance profiles and strength curves. And at the end of the day, if you are systematically and methodically checking these boxes through deliberate variability, you're going to probably get where you want as far as progress in the objective outcome. In this case, we're talking about the glutes, let's say. But with squatting, there is this very mid-level coach that just goes like, well, in order to get better at squat, it's like, well, okay, what are you, fucking Bulgarian? Like, were you just going to sit there and squat all day, come back later, squat later, wake up in the middle of the night like fucking Denzel Washington and remember the Titans and squat again? Like, good luck. Like, good luck coaching anyone for longer than fucking 3 or 4 months. Yeah. But then you start to realize, like, okay, there's direct and indirect ways to progress. And the best way there is to have both direct and indirect point towards progress, not only pay attention to the things that are directly correlated. It's like, yes, practicing the skill of squatting makes you better at the skill of squatting. No, the if you only practiced all of the underlying movement qualities attributed to a squat, would you have a good squat technique? No. The squat technique fairy is not going to come put a good squat under your pillow because you did front foot elevated Bulgarians, but it's not going to hurt. And what are you doing with the rest of your training session? Especially when you deal with an unskilled lifter at a movement. It's like you kind of got a finite window before that dog doesn't fucking hunt anymore. You know what I mean? It's like, do you go home, tell him to rest up and see him in the PM session, train him 17 times a fucking week? No. All right. Well, then what are you going to do, jackass? Right? Like you mid-level, like okay. Now all of a sudden Bulgarians and front foot elevated and walking lunges and static and dynamic core work are back on the table.
Yeah.
Cause like, nothing screams, I don't actually work with people than these edgy mid-level statements from these edgy mid-level coaches that have melted fucking gummy bear physiques and dog shit squats. And so it's just like, look, man, like, okay, cool. Yeah, I understand. Trust me, there's two people in the podcast world at the very least, like other than like Mark Bell, Chad Wesley Smith, like I'm pretty sure we'd fuck up anyone with a bar on our back. So like, don't at me with this bullshit. I understand where you're coming from. I've been there in my ascension as a coach and professional. And I'm telling you, if you want to keep being successful, that road has to keep going. Right. So like lose this fucking teen angst equivalent of your approach to coaching and open up your eyes to the people who are actually doing this well, and open up your eyes to the experience of your clients. Unless you want to move to fucking Uzbekistan and be a fucking high school gym teacher there and just squat people 17 times a week, then you got to do other shit, dog. Like, sorry to break it to you. And, you could play fucking tiddlywinks or you could do Bulgarians. And I'm going to argue that albeit indirect, the tiddlywinks are going to pale in comparison to the indirect benefits of Bulgarians. So like, shut up. It's really like why it's just like so there's neurotypical and neurodivergent methods of thinking. Now here's the thing. Neurodivergent is associated with higher levels of intelligence, but I don't necessarily love the word divergent because it implies that there's a predetermined fork in the road to which someone diverges to the other fork. True neurodivergence is people make the fork in the road and can think critically to create a new path. That's what intelligent thinking is. That's what critical thinking is. It is technically considered neurodivergent as it diverges away from the path. But a neurotypical person would look at that and go, oh, okay, there's two paths. They opted to make another one. It's like, no. True neurodivergence, true intelligence is creating your own path, right? So it's not picking A, B. Everyone goes A and go, oh, I'm edgy and mid, I'm going to go B. It's like, no, dude, you're just an idiot, right? Like you're trying to come off as neurodivergent, but you're doing it through a neurotypical engine. And it's like, it's just leading you through this path that you just go, oh, you go that way, I'm going to go this way. It's like, yeah. But the neurodivergent crowd that are actually smart, the coaches who do this at a high level, the coaches that can, display some level of discernment, the true neurodivergence, the true intelligence comes from forging the fork in the road in the direction and at the right time to create a new thought process for themselves and their clients.
That's a really interesting point that you made, because I see that a lot. If we look at typical training for, say, powerlifting or weightlifting, there's a lot of people that are kind of like highly touted for being good in the industry, but they're good in the industry in the constraints of path A or path B, right? Like I had this thought the other day, is there's a pretty well-known weightlifting coach who I've followed for a while. I've even worked with at certain points in my lifting career. And I think he's really good at solving problems within the constraints of, do I go down path A or path B, right? Is like, and what I mean by that is creating complexes or using like the tools that are available to you in weightlifting to fix issues. But they are a fix for the issue, but it's not the most efficient or the most effective way to fix that issue. He's not thinking in your context here, a neurodivergent way, where he's creating a new path to create a solution for the specific issue. And this is one that's been fucking burning in my brain lately, is the people that squat with a band around their knees. It needs to fucking die. It needs to go away, because the thing that you're doing, well, people still do that. Yeah, it's a big thing. Because, and the issue is that the method of correction is not consistent with the method of movement breakdown, right? There's a different mechanism that are causing these two things. Like someone whose knees like jut in on the squat, the issue there is that they don't have pelvic stability, right? They're not in a position through the pelvis that allows them to advantage the muscles that would keep better knee tracking as they ascend in the squat. So the thing that's going to fix that is understanding how to use your core better, not just activating your glute med. It's not an issue of adductor versus glute med strength. It's that's not the thing. We don't need a external cue to tell us to use our glute med when we squat. We need something that's going to put us in better position through the core so that we can transfer that and we can make that correlation into the squat. So it's like you're only using the things that you see in front of you to solve the problem. You're not thinking outside of the box. You're not creating a new path to the solution and understanding the actual mechanism of breakdown within that movement that is causing this to be an issue. You're just kind of slapping a band-aid on it. Is like it's like someone that drives it around like an 87 Honda Civic and their bumpers fucking dragging on the ground. Like, you could put new bumper hangers on that thing and you could fix it, or you can just pick up the duct tape in the garage and you could duct tape it up and keep driving around. It's just putting duct tape on. It's not actually getting to the root of the issue.
Yeah, you'd be better off putting a band around their waist and having the resistance go from anterior to posterior position of the pelvis. It's like that would actually. I'm gonna do a fucking. There you go. I'm gonna tag in that reel. I'll get J Mars to film that because that's homie. Yeah. No, yeah. At the end of the day, it's funny because I hope the takeaway when and we'll title this some clickbaity shit. I'm sure, like the best squat program. It's like. It kind of just looks like good programming. I love the definition of integrity, I love the definition of tensegrity being tension with integrity, right? And like, I love, if you've ever played with a tensegrity model, that just these small pulls towards a direction, they lean the whole system towards that direction while maintaining tension through integrity throughout the entire system. It's like, that is as true of the physical body, right? The tensegrity model of the body, most often referenced when we speak of fascia, but that's also true of that body in a program, right? Like, me writing a squat specific program isn't me writing a squat only program. I'm just taking a focal point and I'm shifting the body towards that focal point. I'm not shifting it directly out of some of the other movement qualities, some of the other exercises. There's subtlety in the way that I'm going to dose my bias towards a program that's focused on squat outcomes over hinge outcomes, over pressing outcomes, for a common powerlifting example. And it's really just like, when you understand tensegrity models and you see them, you can see the model play out at every level of analysis, right? If you're open to seeing it. So it's like, when we talk about the best squat program, it's going to have a lot of the nuts and bolts of just really good, effective programming across the board, right? And good squat programming is going to be dependent. It's going to be dependent on some of those factors we discussed earlier, on chronological age, on on lifting age, right? On your skill as a coach to recognize these patterns and move quickly through progressions and regressions, right? So if you know how to write effective programming to train someone towards a goal, once you have that framework, once you understand load management through exercise selection, once you understand two-dimensional modeling of biomechanics, moment arms, torques, things like that, a little bit higher dimensional resistance profile, strength curve, more importantly muscle mechanics, and maybe not more importantly, equally as important, muscle mechanics and arthrokinematics. Understand the importance of frequency, understand the best research practices behind volume prescriptions per muscle group per week, understand some signs of fatigue, the difference between that and being tired. You understand the difference between pain and injury and discomfort. You're kind of like built the model already. And then you just go, okay, what objective outcome am I going to pull this Tensegrity model towards? And you realize that the changes are subtle, right? Small hinges open big doors. And so when you start to understand how the Tensegrity in the human body works, of like, this may be why I have knee pain in my left knee as opposed to, my right. And it could be coming from an ankle or a shoulder or pelvis or a spine. And when you understand that relationship, this very sensitive, this tension with integrity relationship, you can start to just apply the fundamental architecture of that relationship at a higher level of analysis to programming. And you start to realize that, look, these shifts, the architecture is the same. And it's just the variables that we plug in at these intersecting points of the Tensegrity model change, but it's going to end up looking very, very similar time and again, right? So I think it's when people talk about and they label their podcast and really a best squat program ever, which, hey, don't hate the player, hate the game. They expect this and are often served this very drastic shift of like, Squat-tober, which just ended. I think, I don't know. I don't practice. I'm non-practicing. I hang a Jesus cross on my door and I say, no, I don't participate. This house doesn't participate in Squat-tober. But it's like, that's how drastic it's gotten. It's like, all right. And then it's like, what, herniated disc November? Like, why did we do that? So it's, I think, I remember saying this in an intensive. It was like me closing off a 2-day weekend in Burlington. And I find myself defaulting back to it again and again as the underlying sentiment to coaching, which is be cool.
Just be cool.
Like, just be cool, dog. Like, just be cool. Like, no, you know what? No sudden, you learn something new, be cool. You make a mistake, be cool. You do something right, be cool. Like, I can't express to you how living by that sentiment, as juvenile as it may sound, and we all kind of know what it means, is going to find you so well in your career. So like, someone comes up to you and says, hey, I want a squat program. Be cool. Like, don't go nuts. Don't like that squat every day, twice on Sundays. Like, just be cool, man. Like, just a little bit of squatting here, a little bit of, some extra work here, a little bit of unilateral, a little bit of core. Like, you don't got to go changing everything, right? So I'll end my part of this podcast with one last, be cool. And I think, look, if you guys listen to the podcast before, I appreciate you guys hanging out. And I hope it's not repetitive, but like, if you find it to be repetitive and listen to what we're not saying, it's like, these principles are principles for a reason, because they're reproducibly the straightest line to getting the results that you guys want.
Yeah. To say it in a different way, I completely agree with the sentiment, but one of the most impactful books that I think I read around like exercise programming was the book Periodization by Tudor Bompa. And it just literally outlines, it's mostly for like field athlete and sport, but like a periodization model where it's like you move from, maybe off season is like a restoration phase. Then you go GPP, hypertrophy, strength, power, sport specificity. That's kind of it. Like, it's the crux of training for most people is exactly the same until you get to that sport specificity portion, right? And the sport might look different, but like, even you cut off the power side of things if we're talking like hypertrophy, but a lot of this, it holds true. Like the crux of strength training, it's all the same. You make sure you have range of motion, you make sure you have stability, you make sure you have the underlying muscular endurance to complete the task, then you get stronger. Or I'm sorry, then you build muscle, then you get stronger. And those are the adaptations that are going to be the foundation for anything you do in training. And then you take that and you form that into the specifics of the sport that you're trying to fit it into, whether that's a field sport, whether that's hypertrophy, whether that's a strength sport. But 75% of the training is exactly the same for anyone that comes in the door. So it doesn't have to be different most of the time. And even the subtleties that are different, they're not that different. They're just variations of the route that someone would have gone had they had a different destination at the end of it. So it's, kind of agreeing with what you're saying is that a lot of this, it's tried and true. And yeah, maybe we've been saying the same shit for the last decade. That's because the same shit works. And like, the thing that these mid coaches aren't getting is they're not getting results. The thing that pre-script coaches are getting, or like you or I or the people that we work with, or like Mac and Killian, is they're getting fucking results. and they're doing it because they're using principles that hold true. No matter who they're working with, they understand the underlying principles that are going to get results.
Yeah, one last advertisement. Like, we'll take guys who are bodybuilding specific and put them in a room with the best football players in the world, but they have a principles based approach based off of the idea of just being cool, and they'll crush it.
Yeah.
Right? It's the dogmatism, it's the sensationalism. It's like, that's what gets guys crushed. Like, when it comes to the proving ground, it's the people who rely on a system rather than a system's way of thinking that just get absolutely cooked by these athletes. It's people who go, oh, okay, it's like what I do, but this variable and this variable slightly different. It's like, exactly. That's it. So, all right. Well, hey, we got another squat episode in the books. In the interest of selling you more shit. No, if you guys are interested in this, Prescript level 1 is going to go live again in January. So our opt-in list is currently open. So if you head to www.pre-script.com, all you need to do is put your email address on the PSL1 page, and it's the only opportunity for a discount we offer for the course. When registration goes live, you're going to get that email to get first crack at a seat. So head on over. We'll put the link in the show notes. Appreciate you guys hanging out. We'll see you guys next week.